Chapter 5 of Mary Barton. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dawn Murphy in El Segundo, California. Mary Barton by Elizabeth Cleghorn Gaskill. Chapter 5. The Mill on Fire. Jem Wilson to the rescue. Learned he was, nor bird nor insect flew, but he its leafy home and history knew. Nor wild flower decked the rock, nor moss the well, but he its name and qualities could tell. Eliot. There is a class of man in Manchester, unknown even to many of the inhabitants, whose existence will probably be doubted by many, who yet may claim kindred with all the noble names that science recognizes. I said in Manchester, but they are scattered all over the manufacturing districts of Lancashire. In the neighbourhood of Oldham there are weavers, common hand-loom weavers, who throw the shuttle with unceasing sound, though Newton's Principia lies open on the loom to be snatched at in work hours, but revelled over in meal times or at night. Mathematical problems are received with interest and studied with absorbing attention by many the broad-spoken, common-looking factory hand. It is perhaps less astonishing that the more popularly interesting branches of natural history have their warm and devoted followers among this class. There are botanists among them, equally familiar with either the Linnean or the natural system, who know the name and habitat of every plant within a day's walk from their dwellings, who steal the holiday of a day or two when any particular plant should be in flower, and tying up their simple food in their pocket-handkerchiefs, set off with simple purpose to fetch home the humble-looking weed. There are entomologists who may be seen with a rude-looking net, ready to catch any winged insect, or a kind of dredge with which they rake the green and slimy pools, practical, shrewd, hard-working men who pore over every new specimen with real scientific delight. Nor is it the common and more obvious divisions of entomology and botany that alone attract these earnest seekers after knowledge. Perhaps it may be owing to the great annual town holiday of Whitsun week, so often falling in May or June, that the two great beautiful families of Ephemeridae and Phryganidae have been so much and so closely studied by Manchester workmen, while they have in a great measure escaped general observation. If you will refer to the preface to Sir J. E. Smith's Life, I have it not by me, or I would copy you the exact passage, you will find that he names a little circumstance corroborative of what I have said. Being on a visit to Roscoe of Liverpool, he made some inquiries from him as to the habitat of a very rare plant, said to be found in certain places in Lancashire. Mr. Roscoe knew nothing of the plant, but stated that if any one could give him the desired information, it would be a hand-loom weaver in Manchester, whom he named. Sir J. E. Smith proceeded by boat to Manchester, and on arriving at that town he inquired of the porter who was carrying his luggage if he could direct him to so-and-so. "Oh, yes," replied the man, "he goes a bit in my way." And on further investigation it turned out that both the porter and his friend the weaver were skilful botanists, and able to give Sir J. E. Smith the very information which he wanted. Such are the tastes and pursuits of some of the thoughtful, little understood working-men of Manchester. And Margaret's grandfather was one of these. He was a little wirily-looking old man who moved with a jerky motion, as if his limbs were worked by a string, like a child's toy, with the dun-coloured hair lying thin and soft at the back and sides of his head. His forehead was so large it seemed to overbalance the rest of his face, which had, indeed, lost its natural contour by the absence of all the teeth. The eyes absolutely gleamed with intelligence, so keen, so observant, you felt as if they were almost wizard-like. Indeed, the whole room looked not unlike a wizard's dwelling. Instead of pictures were hung rude wooden frames of impaled insects. The little table was covered with cabalistic books, and beside them lay a case of mysterious instruments, one of which Job Legh was using when his granddaughter entered. On her appearance he pushed his spectacles up so as to rest midway on his forehead, and gave Mary a short, kind welcome. But Margaret he caressed as a mother caresses her firstborn, stroking her with tenderness and almost altering his voice as he spoke to her. Mary looked round on the odd, strange things she had never seen at home, and which seemed to her to have a very uncanny look. "Is your grandfather a fortune-teller?" whispered she to her new friend. "No," replied Margaret in the same voice, "but you are not the first as have taken him for such. He is only fond of such things as most folks know nothing about." "And do you know aught about them too?" "I know a bit about some of the things grandfather is fond of, just because he's fond of 'em. I tried to learn about 'em." "What things are these?" said Mary, struck with the weird-looking creatures that crawled around the room and their roughly made glass cases. But she was not prepared for the technical names which Job Legh pattered upon her ear, on which they fell like hail on a skylight, and the strange language only bewildered her more than ever. Margaret saw the state of the case, and came to the rescue. "Look, Mary, at this horrid scorpion. He gave such a fright. I am all of a twitter yet when I think of it. Grandfather went to Liverpool one Whitsun week, to go strolling about the docks and pick up what he could from the sailors, who often bring some queer thing or another from the hot countries they go to. And so he sees a chap with a bottle in his hand, like a druggist's physic bottle, and says, 'Grandfather, what have ye got in there?' So the sailor holds it up, and grandfather knew it was a rare kind of scorpion, not common even in the East Indies, where the man came from, and says he, 'How did you catch this fine fellow? For he wouldn't be taken for nothing, I'm thinking.' And the man said as how, when they were unloading the ship, he'd found him lying behind a sack of rice, and he thought the cold had killed him, for he was not squashed nor injured a bit. He did not like to part with any of the spirit out of his grog to put the scorpion in, but slipped him into the bottle, knowing there were folks enow who would give him something for him. So grandfather gave him a shilling." "2 shillings," interrupted Job Legh, "and a good bargain it was." "Well, grandfather came home as proud as Punch, and pulled the bottle out of his pocket. But you see, the scorpion were doubled up, and grandfather thought I could fairly see how big he was. So he shakes him out right before the fire, and a good warm one it was. For I was ironing, I remember. I let off ironing and stooped down over to him to look at him better, and grandfather got a book, and began to read how this very kind were the most poisonous and vicious species, how their bite were often fatal, and then went on to read how people who were bitten got swelled and screamed with pain. I was listening hard, but as it fell out, I never took my eyes off the creature, though I could not have told I was watching it. Suddenly it seemed to give a jerk, and before I could speak it gave another, and in a minute it was as wild as it could be, running at me just like a mad dog." "What did you do?" asked Mary. "Me? Well, I jumped first on a chair, and then all the things I'd been ironing on the dresser, and I screamed for grandfather to come up by me, but he did not hearken to me." "Why, if I'd come up by thee, who'd ha' caught the creature, I should like to know?" Well, I begged grandfather to crush it, and I had the iron right over it once, ready to drop. But grandfather begged me not to hurt it in that way, so I couldn't think what he'd have, for he dropped round the room as if he were sore afraid, for all he begged me not to injure it. At last he goes to the kettle, and lifts up the lid and peeps in.